these are my thoughts on my first Joan Didion. I recently finished The Year of Magical Thinking, and these are my thoughts on it. So one thing that I find super interesting always is the ways in which you encounter like a book or a piece of work in general before you actually encounter it. So my reference to Joan Didion, I think the first time I heard about her work was when I was 20. Yeah, I was 20, and it was the spring semester of my time at Princeton. I was taking a coming-of-age literature class with this like wonderful professor who I loved and worked for a couple years, and we read Goodbye to All That, which is their essay about like leaving New York. And I mean, I thought it was cool. I didn't think much of it at the time. It didn't really stick with me in like a real way. And then Beltrist, the book club, like also digital community, we're becoming like increasingly less digital with each year, I feel like, though. Like we're just like expanding the universe. They posted a lot about Didion like towards the end of her life, and I remember seeing them post about her like estate sales, stuff like that. That was my like next encounter with Didion. And then I would say I was at a rooftop party in Soho with a friend of mine who was like a roommate turned friend in a sublet I had, and a friend of hers who I never really thought really liked me. Granted, it was when I was like much greener than I am now, and even though it wasn't, I guess it was like a bit ago now, was talking about like mourning, I think like her grandmother, and she talked about how she read this book. So that's my encounter with the book and with Didion before actually reading it, and that's like my schema going in. And yeah, right off the bat I was like intrigued by, I also was talking to this other writer who granted was a man, so I'm curious if that affects like perspective on female literature. But he was saying that Didion felt very like name droppy to him and a bit cold. So those are all the things that I like went in with from other people, and like my little interaction to her work. Right off the bat, I like the language because it is so straightforward. Like I do love like flowery fiction, but I love it when you can tell someone's like saying a word because that's the word that they want to use, not because they think it's like good or impressive. I think that's the hallmark of like a really passionate writer, someone who's clearly just trying to like say something and not impress you with the way that they say it. But it seems to me that she writes a lot for like clarity, which I know this discourse has already happened in some of the stuff I've posted online, but someone was commenting on a TikTok about her career as a journalist. So I mean, that kind of impresses a little bit for me too, like about maybe her going for like clarity, whereas I feel like for me I read more for like feeling and something like really ephemeral, whereas it feels like as someone was commenting on TikTok, I think, and we had this like discussion in Discord too, like she's almost writing to figure it out. And then it did inspire me to start like journaling again, because I felt very detached from like my own feelings in certain situations and needed to like work through some things to understand like what it was that I was like feeling. So thank you, Miss Didion, for that. So in terms of annotations, this is the first thing I annotated. This is my attempt to make sense of the period that followed, weeks and then months, that cut loose any fixed idea I ever had about death, about illness, about probability and luck, about good fortune and bad, about marriage and children and memory, about grief, about the ways in which people do and do not deal with the fact that life ends, about the shallowness of sanity, about life itself. I've been a writer my entire life. As a writer, even as a child, long before what I wrote began to be published, I developed a sense that meaning itself was resident in the rhythms of words and sentences and paragraphs, a technique for withholding whatever it was I thought or believed behind an increasingly impenetrable polish. The way I write is who I am, or have become, yet this is a case in which I wish I had, instead of words, something, and the rhythms, a cutting room. I'm always really intrigued by artists who describe like what it means to be an artist in their respective medium. And as a writer myself, it's always really interesting when you say that you're a writer, like people's reaction. I think people think of writers in like quite a romantic way. I think Tech and like Substack in an interesting way have like helped memify like writers a little bit. Like I know there's kind of a culture around saying you have like a Substack and people are like, oh. So I don't know, I'm just intrigued by that. But I agree, like words and meanings have like rhythm. Like whenever as a kid my parents used to have us write like letters to explain like why we wanted to do certain activities, and then came to a place as a kid where whenever I was in trouble and I felt like there was dissonance between like what I wanted to say and like how I was saying it to my parents, I would like write them a letter kind of explaining it. So I think for me the sense of childhood is like, or like reconnecting with childhood is something I'm doing like through journaling, because I like wrote to convey something, but I guess I also wrote to articulate myself to someone else starting quite young, and not necessarily for like personal reflection, which I'm like getting more into. So interesting. Okay, my next annotation is if I do it that way, we are gonna be here forever. Let me just go to my tabs. I didn't annotate that much too, which is for me is like a good indicator that I'm not like in love with the style. Because I'll underline things for specific phrases, for like beauty, just because I like the way it sounds. Yeah, this page is dog-eared, but I probably didn't have a pen, so I can't remember why. Yeah. Okay, this one. That the practice would encourage return to constructive cognitive engagement. I think I was into that because of this idea of like reconstructing cognitive engagement is something like we're thinking a lot about with like tech and consciousness. Like how do you reconstruct like the very human part of people when we haven't put emphasis on the humanities for like, how old am I? For like 13 years. Like do the math in my head, like it's vaguely correct, yeah. That was based on nothing but my own personal experience, like when I noticed STEM being like over prioritized in relationship to humanities as a kid. Like no cultural markers, just subjective experience on that number. Okay. There's a dog-eared page. Did they think that because it was a story, it could be told without consequence? Oh, I think that's interesting. I think maybe I was thinking about this idea of like personal narrative that I've been pretty into, like the idea that there are these stories that we all tell ourselves about ourselves and like about other people, and how those have like real implications for everything, for the way we move throughout the world, it's kind of crazy. Okay, when a patient was near death because their experience was that the family members would focus on the screens rather than on the dying patient. I've talked about this in some writings more, I think, but yeah, it is kind of nuts how screens give people this like false sense of control. I think in a written piece I compare it to like being in New York. Whenever someone approaches me that I feel like a little bit intimidated by, or like afraid of, whether it's like, I don't know, maybe I'm like alone, you know, and like man approaching me, I'll like take out my phone as if my phone is gonna save me. Like, come on. And I guess you do have that feeling of like access to someone else, but I'm reminded of like, I also read about going to see Titanic the musical with a friend of mine, and when like they're trying to reach the other ship by like radio that could have saved them, and the ship just like stops responding. Really interesting question of like a false sense of security in screens, not just like phone, but like screen, and like graph, and like noise, like super interesting. Do you feel like sometimes when I have an idea that's like not even related to the book I'm reading, I'll just like write it on the page, and I'm literally like never gonna see it unless I'm flipping through all of them like I am right now. So I like made a note to myself about something entirely different. Okay. He was alive and then he was dead and we were watching. Wow. I don't remember why I annotated that. I think it just like stuck out to me, and it has so much like punch, even though it's grammatically such a simple sentence, which I feel like the best ones usually are. Like I was just telling someone about the Faulkner sentence I love from Absalom. That's I was young. Why didn't anyone tell me I was young? It's beautiful. So simple. Like so simple. Oh, this is funny. On page 144, she's talking about how John, her husband, that's his name, right? Yes. Yeah, how he went to, oh, there's a quote about Faulkner, too. Faulkner once said that a writer's obituary should read, he wrote books and he died. So I'll stick with Faulkner. Look at that. He went to Princeton and he found the Nassoons absurd, which they're these like, they're one of the choirs that do like a cappella arch sings, I think. And I can never get behind it. I don't want to sound like a hater, but I can never get behind it. And you know, you're like stressed out of your mind too. You're just trying to like go home, or you're having this like awful situationship at 17. I went to college young at 18, and you're like, I don't know, like walking home like tipsy with like your heart like shallowly broken because it was never really full in the first place, and there's a group doing like a cappella choir and you have to like walk through, like it's funny, it's absurd. And that's what she says, is that Joan found it absurd. So that made me like giggle, and I wrote, holy shit, yes, yes, Joan, because it's just like kind of affirming. Yeah. Okay. Was it only by dreaming or writing that I could find out what I thought? That's how I feel about feelings sometimes, like I was saying, and that's why I started journaling again. I think that's the quote that made me think like, okay, where's my journal? There was some pen in there, even though I didn't think I marked the page. Time is the school in which we learn. It's like a pretty sentence. Marriage is memory, marriage is time. The denial of time. For years, I saw myself through John's eyes. I did not age. That was interesting, like being captured in someone else. I feel like so much of like what I've read about marriage talks about the fear of, I think like Nin, like the fear of like being made stagnant by one person, or like having one person accept you for who you are and then both of you changing. So I do really like the way she talks about this and the way she talks about John. I think like reading this book in a weird way gave me hope for like maybe someday being married to another artist, because the way they talk about their relationship to one another's work is like, it's so beautiful, and they're so like supportive of one another in that regard. Yeah. Okay, I realized how open we are to the persistent message that we can avert death. Yeah. I folded that page. Oh, I think because there's like a restaurant. I was wanting to see if it was still open. Yeah, and then I just like write stuff to myself in books sometimes, and it's like so whenever I'm like using one to find a quote when I'm writing something, or if I like, I don't know, I'll just like look and I'm like, oh, it's so like fun to find little like messages to yourself, which is why I'm very excited I started journaling again. I don't believe in forcing it though. I don't believe in forcing anything. And as much as I want to say like I loved this book, I didn't. Like I think the word I used today with someone else was like tepid. Like I feel very tepid about it. It was nice. I found myself like picking it up sometimes, like having the urge to, but I don't think it's gonna particularly stick with me. And a lot of that is maybe like context. Like I have lost people in my life, but but I think emotionally, like she was a journalist first, right? And I took one journalism class for my freshman year of high school. So like I was what, like 14? I went to high school young. I was like 13. And maybe it was my sophomore year, I don't remember. And that was my last class, because like writing for me is something that is so emotional, and I always have to feel like really tapped into like some sort of like something bigger than myself, and I can't just see it as words. To me it's like so intuitive and like necessary, and maybe it's like that for her too, but I think whereas it seems that maybe she feels comforted by form and by order, when it comes to writing, I find like form and order is these like interesting things to like hold, to know, to learn, and then to break. So it was like a great read. It was beautiful and reflective, but it's not like going to be a favorite, I think. That's that. Thank you, Miss Didion. Thank you for listening to me ramble on about my annotations, and